afternoon. Jason sent me a case last week out of the federal court in New York, and so I wrote a short article on it, and there was misspelling of me, blame it on me.
Yeah.
Now, this involves the Dormant Commerce Clause. We talked about this a couple times over the past year. It's going to continue to be a problem. It's out of New York where two cannabis companies sued the New York State Cannabis Commission and their board, and every place has a different term they use for these folks, and also the leaders of two of these groups, because they tried to apply for a license, and you're given an opportunity for extra priority in the license process, and we all know how that works in social equity and local preferences and all that kind of happy horse shit. And they went to load up their California conviction for cannabis and their California residency requirements that met all the criteria. I'm 80% of the median income, and I've lived here for the right amount of time, and the portal wouldn't accept it. Okay, so if you take a step back from that and take a look at the underlying statutes they were based upon, these are what we call enabling statutes, which give regulators the right to write regulations. There's nothing in there that says you have to be a New York resident. On the face of these regulations, it doesn't violate the Commerce Clause or the Dormant Commerce Clause on its face. But the next analysis we look at as it's applied, is it unconstitutional? That's where the bells start to go off here. Because if we step back a little bit in the Dormant Commerce Clause conversation, this all comes about because our Articles of the Confederation back in the 1780s, they had border wars between states over commerce, protective tariffs, taxes at the border, all kinds of shit like that. And it was one of the major reasons that we put together the Constitution, not we, our founding fathers put the Constitutional Republic together and set it up the way it did. And the federal government has the exclusive power for commerce. Okay. Now, in the cannabis space, they, like I said a minute ago, they divided their authority and let the states make some of this up. But the Commerce Clause itself, that's the exclusive purview of the federal government. Now, if there is a law passed that unduly interferes with interstate commerce, now you've got a question about whether the Dormant Commerce Clause is going to apply. And in this case, if you're not a New York resident, you de facto can't apply. And the cases out there are pretty clear. And this is where Illinois has a problem too, because if you put on the face of your statute that you have to be a resident to get involved in a commercial enterprise, you're probably going to lose that case almost every time unless the state's an actor in it. But the other question is, okay, what do we do when we look at this statute? Is it unduly restrict interstate commerce? Okay. And one of the questions they ask is it narrowly tailored for legitimate, local purpose? And in constitutional analysis, there's three tests they apply. The rational basis test, is it reasonably related to a legitimate governmental purpose, in which case the government wins every time. But the strict scrutiny, it's got to be necessarily related to a principal or primary government purpose. And in that case, the government loses every time. But in the middle is what we call middle scrutiny. And this rule about it's got to be narrowly tailored for a legitimate purpose is a middle level scrutiny. Not that anybody cares about this shit, but I read it in a bathroom stall last night, and I thought I'd tell you guys about this morning. Okay. Now, yeah. This is just an allegation. It's a complaint, and just be sure this is what these parties are saying. And the plaintiffs are Vericites or Vericites. And if you know medicine, the way it's spelled, it's Vericites, okay? But I don't know how they pronounce it because I don't give a shit. Smoke a blunt and get beyond the word here. These two companies have started this lawsuit, and they also asked the court to halt everything going on in New York except for those that are currently fully permitted and licensed and up operating. Small number of them. They want everything else to come to a screeching halt. And this is another example of how these lawmakers and legislators and regulators, they can just screw shit up. You can't even imagine how they could do this. Why would they close that portal? They don't have an attorney and staff that told them, hey, this is going to get you in trouble? Apparently not. Because if you can't upload from out of state, then I think you're staring down the barrel of this being found an unconstitutional as applied regulation. Okay, that's my feeling. I'd like to wait until we get the response from the state and see what they have to say. Here again, we're going to have creative attorneys making shit up and throwing it at the court. So we'll see how this works out. But right now, I think they've got a problem if they're continuing to restrict that portal. But we'll see as this moves along. But the Dormant Commerce Clause is going to continue to be a problem for trying to provide social equity across the cannabis space, because it just gets very difficult if you're restricting out-of-state people or people who don't have these qualifications from an equal chance at these licenses. And I don't know that I know the answer, because I've been involved here in California with multiple of these problems, and the answers are just not there. It's site-specific, and the problem is that affirmative action was thrown in the trash can. So if you try to do this the way it should be done, the communities that were over-policed were black and brown. But you can't say that. Got to be neutral on its face. Okay, so there's the problem that we are facing. How do we bring social equity to people who were traditionally stepped on by law enforcement, especially in cannabis, without admitting that we're trying to help people of color, pull back out of this war that was waged against them, without saying that. And I think this is just an ongoing part of this pissing match we're going to see going forward. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about this. So I'll throw it back at you.
This has been a long time coming.
Right?
So, this is, I know me and you, Dale, were the only ones calling this shit out last year. We said that, dormant commerce clause falls, or we open up interstate commerce. And when cannabis truly does become a commodity, social equity, unfortunately, is going to be seen as unconstitutional. And a lot of people are going to be in a little bit of a pickle, trying to find out if their operations are eligible for interstate commerce, which I don't think, the way Congress is looking right now. And like you said, Dale, with affirmative action falling to the wayside recently, I don't think it's going to be a pretty picture. Unless they somehow into federal legislation put social equity into law and put like certain parameters around that, I could see a million lawsuits going out and people just saying that it's just not fair. And because the U.S. government and the U.S. as a whole just doesn't like to say sorry, doesn't like to explicitly apologize for things that it's done in the past.
It's because we're not a sorry country.
Like I said,
well, that's debatable.
America doesn't like to admit what it did was wrong. And even when the facts are in front of the country and things are the right thing to do, there is no right and wrong when it comes to capitalism.
I think there is a simple answer for this, Dale. I think this might not be the popular answer, though, is the problem. Anytime the government continues to interfere in markets, we always have problems. Stop interfering in markets. Let the free market work the way it's supposed to work. Now, that only goes so far, right? How do we tie social equity into that ideology or to that thought process? And this is where I think we think about social equity and social justice in the wrong aspect. Like, we think about it as a continuum that needs to happen forever. And that's not the point, right? Because if we get the social equity and social justice stuff correct on the first time, then there's no need for it after that, because then we've leveled the playing field. And that's what we want as social equity applicants and social justice applicants. We just want a level playing field because we've been harmed, because we had to go through things that put us at a disadvantage. So the free market will work itself out. We don't have to interfere in this way and say this, and you can't do this, and people from over here can't run businesses over here. It's nonsense, and it starts to you build this web that becomes so tangled that it suffocates the business, it suffocates the market. It's happening now in California right now. It's something that we have to unwind and unravel. So the way we got to look at social equity is like the way we look at reconstruction after a war, right? This is the war on cannabis. People have been harmed and we have casualties in this sense. We go in, we rebuild, we make it better, we make it to where people can have sustaining livable existence, and then we continue to move on after the playing field has been leveled. I think that's the direction that we have to look at this in. That's where we keep on messing this up, is we keep on asking the government, hey, come in and help us on this, or come in and overregulate this, and then when it happens, we go, oh, you guys overregulated this.
Well, it's the leveling the playing field that's the problem here, Luke, because the Constitution has a bunch of provision that requires equality, equal protection, privileges and immunities clauses, things like that. And we had a case here in California called the Bakke case, and it was a big Supreme Court case where a white guy was trying to get into medical school back in affirmative action. And since then here in California, it has just the playing field, trying to level the playing field, has been a difficult one. Now, in LA, they set out criteria that you couldn't use color of someone's skin because that's a protected class and it's just a big mess to do. So they set up places where there was over-enforcement, things like that. Well, the Armenian community went to the local city council and they managed to get their areas put into those traditional over-policed areas, and they got the same preference that the black and brown communities get. And I tell you, that it just was a huge mess out here. It's like, oh, you guys weren't targets like black and brown people were. Well, the problem is the 800-pound gorilla is you can't talk about black and brown because that's unconstitutional. But they're the ones that got kicked in the ass over this.
Yep.
Hey, Luke, you and I are white.
Luke's point,
we got bent over by the system for pot, but we ain't the traditional people who got bent over by the system.
And yeah, I think to Luke's point about opening the playing field.
In there too, Dale, gentrification. Like if you were there then, a lot of those folks that were in those zip codes, like they don't look like us no more. they might be eligible now because they live now. Was he saying, Soham? Sorry,
yeah, I was going to say, to Luke's point about leveling the playing field, I think like a lot of places, especially like in California where we have some of these social equity programs, the idea is creating this protected system for people that have been disadvantaged by the war on drugs or targeted by the war on drugs. To me, the better approach is to do something, and I'm not by any means saying that Oklahoma has the most robust or efficient cannabis market in the country, but their approach to licensing, where there was no restrictions, they made the application fees very low. They didn't have canopy space caps, so you could get one license and grow 200 acres worth of product. I think they did a better job in the direction of social equity because they made it easier for anybody to get a license. And you saw the result of that is that you don't see the big publicly traded MSOs trying to compete in that market because they don't have those monopoly protections that they do in limited license markets. So I think places like that, you see New Mexico has a similarly like easy system of applying for a license. I think those programs and those structures are going to do more to actually support social equity and social justice than these protectionist systems that we've seen.
That's a really good point, Soham. But we got to go to commercial. We're going to be right back.